Welcome to today's RUC People, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Chris Voysey, who has been part of our community here for a little while now, been coming along, I think, quite regularly for
about a year or so.
For a year or so.
Yeah.
So this is a chance to get to know him, and welcome, Chris. Great to have you.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you.
So Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing right now.
Okay, well, I'd like to be able to say I'm retired, but I can't afford to be retired. So what I am is I'm semi-retired. But I have, in the last 10 years, I started up a training and coaching consultancy, if one can call it that. So that's what I'm doing now and have been doing for the last few years, which is training in communication skills and presentation skills. And I'm a qualified speech teacher from way back. So I'm using that to develop a coaching practice as a voice coach.
A voice coach. And this is for people who use their voice in on radio or TV?
No,
or
it's for people who use their voice who is everybody, which is everybody. Yeah. I mean, it's just, you know, very often, I mean, here's this amazing instrument that we all have. Yeah. And many of us are not using it to anything like its potential, as with our brains and our bodies and all the rest of it. So, and that becomes most apparent when you're called on to do the speech at your son's 21st or a wedding talk or a presentation at work, whatever it might be, and suddenly you go into panic mode, which most people do. So quite often I'm dealing with that sort of situation. People will phone and say, look, I've got to get this talk and put it together. Can I come and have a few sessions? And I would say, of course, I'd be delighted. Other times it's people who want to develop more confidence just in speaking, in using their own voices.
And how did this come about? Do you have a long history of using your voice?
Well, I was in the theatre many, many years ago. So it actually started when I was 12 years old. I was a singer. I was a boy soprano. And I sang in the church choir, and I sang in the Eisteddfod, etc. And I got pulled into Oliver, the musical Oliver, which at that time was the first really big, long-running musical production in South Africa. It started in Johannesburg and ran 6 months. And then it moved to Durban. I was living in Durban. I'm born in Durban. I was born in Durban. And a friend of mine kind of dragged me along to the auditions for Fagan's Gang. There are a lot of 12-year-old, 13-year-old boys in that production, as you would know. And it was going to run in Durban for 2 months and then move to Cape Town, PE, East London, and in fact, tour for the next 6 months. So I went for the audition. Joan Brickell was doing the auditions. It was a Brian Brook production. She was doing it for him. And there were hundreds of boys at the Lyric Theatre in Durban back in the day. And she just heard me and she called Brian Brook and said, we've got our next Oliver. I didn't know what she was talking about. 2 weeks later, I was playing Oliver. So it was a big adjustment, you know, for this Durban North boy who just sang in the church choir, went to school and did all those kind of normal 12-year-old boy things. Suddenly, I was catapulted into this play, which ran, it wouldn't be allowed now. It ran every single night of the week. And on Fridays, there were 2 shows, a 6 and a 9. And on Saturday, there was a matinee and a 6 and a 9.
And at the same time, you're at school?
Well, of course, that just, you know, that disappeared.
Well, I was going to say, you know, do you go to school in the daytime and to the Lyric Theatre at night?
Exactly. That's precisely what I did.
Right.
And of course, you know, getting to bed late. I was 12 years old and then went on tour. We did have some tutors, but at the end of Standard 5, leaving primary school, I was doing pretty well at school. By the end of Standard 6, not so good.
So, I mean, that must be a hell of a thing for a 12, 13-year-old boy to suddenly become, you know, a lead role in a national production.
Yeah.
And
particularly given the fact that I came from a very simple family. I mean, we'd never been to the theatre. You know, I mean, you went to church concerts.
Yeah.
That was it. My life was in the Durban North Methodist Church. In fact, my mother was secretary of that church when Alex Boraine was the minister there.
Wow.
So, you know, that's going back, that's the early 60s, 61, 62.
Yeah.
So my experience of entertainment, if you like, was listening to Alex Boraine and other ministers, or watching, you know, a kind of a concert.
But I mean, you were saying, you know, you sang in the choir. If you're playing Oliver in a national production, I mean, I'm sure you have to be able to sing, but you also have to be able to act and have stage presence, you know.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, obviously I did have that. In fact, the friend who pulled me into it did speech and drama lessons, which I had never heard of.
Yes.
I mean, I'm now a qualified speech and drama teacher, but at the time, I'd never heard of speech and drama. And he was going for the auditions. Andre was his name. And we went off together for these auditions. And of course, I was captivated. The world of the theatre fascinated me. And so, as I say, within a couple of weeks, I had a very good singing voice. I sang in the choir. I was a boy soprano. In fact, I sang in the Natal Eisteddfod when I was 11 years old, and I won.
Yeah,
I won the top position as a boy soprano. My uncle was a church organist and a singing teacher, so he trained me. So, you know, obviously I did have the ability to sing, and I think I was just naturally confident. Maybe overconfident, I'm not sure. But they could put me on a stage. Joan Brickell did the auditions. She trained me for the part of Oliver. And I played it every night for the rest of my life, 6 months. That's 6 months.
Wow. And did that catapult you into a whole lifetime of singing and acting and performing?
To some extent, I went on singing in the church choir. I was very involved in high school in dramatics. I had full colours for dramatics at the school I attended up to matric level. And then when I left school, I went to the army, as many white South African boys of 18 years old did.
A bit of a contrast to playing Oliver at the Lyric Theatre.
Very much so. But you know, you had to go. So I did my 9 months training and was very keen to go into the theatre actually as a job. But it just wasn't easy. And I think I had a very romanticized picture of it.
I don't think it's ever been easy, has it, making a living in theatre and acting?
But you know, when you're 19 or 20, you think everything's easy.
Yes.
And you think you'll probably, you know, because we didn't have YouTube or TikTok or any of that stuff that can catapult you to fame.
Yeah.
So I was involved in that for a couple of years with Brickell Burke and doing a few bits and pieces. But then I actually moved into advertising, which was just a field that fascinated me. And I thought, okay, if I'm not going to make a career in the theatre, then I want to be in something creative.
Yeah.
And I got into advertising.
Did you go to university or did you?
Only later. In fact, I got involved in a church leadership program, which was being run in Durban. By then I was living in Johannesburg. So I grew up in Durban at the age of 13. Just after Oliver, my father was transferred to Johannesburg and I lived there until I was about 21. Came back to Durban. And was working in a church program, a leadership program. So I was in advertising for a short while. The church played a really significant role in my life, all my life. And this leadership training program was being run. It was called Give a Year of Your Life. So I was involved in this. So I went back to Durban because it was being run there by the Methodist Church Youth Department. And I spent a year on that program. At the end of that year, they invited me to come back onto the program as one of the trainers. So I joined that program for a couple of years. And then, funnily enough, the theatre raised its head again. I was walking through the streets of Durban, and I heard a voice call my name, and it was a young lady, who had been in The King and I with me, which was a production I was involved in after Oliver. And we just, linked immediately, and she was running by then. She was a qualified speech and drama teacher. She was running a speech and drama college in Durban. And she said, come and join us. So I spent the next 2 years doing a teacher's diploma in speech and drama through Trinity College London. And in fact, I joined their theatre company, which was called Theatre Roundabout. And we toured Natal, doing school productions. Then I thought I needed to get a degree. So then I started going to University of Natal, University of KZN, part-time. And I got hooked into acting there through the Elizabeth Snedden, who was the professor of that department.
What were you studying at UKZN?
Speech and drama and English, those were my main subjects. In fact, I ended up dropping speech and drama because it was just so involving that I was putting myself through university. I couldn't cope with the amount of work. So I ended up with a BA in English and philosophy, as it so happens. But while I was there, Snedden got hold of me and pulled me into her little theatre company, which was called City Centre Theatre or something, I can't remember, Theatre Workshop. And again, we toured all over Natal. So it was a crazy time because I was acting, I was studying, I was trying to run a little studio of my own with kids doing drama classes and so on. It was a very busy couple of years.
Wow. And that, did you stay on that trajectory with...
No, I didn't, because while I was doing all that, I met a young lady, Heidi, who I fell in love with. And eventually we decided we'd get married. So, and I don't think she found the whole theatre, the insecurity of all this, my crazy life, I think she found that a bit threatening. And I'm sure her parents found it very threatening. So her father...
Wanting their daughter to marry someone with a good, stable career.
Yes, well, her father was a doctor and her mother was a teacher. So they were thinking along those lines, you know. So anyway, I mean, this is jumping a couple of years, but then we decided to get married, and I moved into advertising because it was a creative environment. Funnily enough, I had been in a production. I did a crazy thing, which you could do back in those days. I'm not sure it's possible now with the kind of employment situation we have in South Africa and worldwide to some extent. I phoned various advertising agencies in Durban to say, can I come and talk to you? Because I want to get into advertising. Can you imagine trying to do that today? I don't know. Anyway, I spoke to the person who was the MD of BBDO. And the funny thing was that he'd seen me in a show that I was in the night before. So when I came on the line, he treated me as if he knew me, which was, you know, quite strange. I said, do we know each other? He said, I saw you last night in We Can't Pay, We Won't Pay, a production that I happened to be in a couple of months. So he said, I'd love to talk to you, come. And he gave me a sort of a test in copywriting. He said, write me some radio spots, write me some headlines for this particular client, and come back and see me. And that I did. And when I came back to see him, he said, you've got a job. Start as soon as you can. And that was the start of my career in advertising, which went on for about the next 10, 12 years.
Okay.
Eventually, I became a creative director. We moved to Johannesburg. We were based in Durban.
Yes.
We moved to Johannesburg. So, of course, I'd lived some time, my high school years in Johannesburg, came back to Durban, back to Johannesburg as a married man,
yes.
Now already with a couple of children,
Yeah.
because I was transferred there by BBDO.
Right.
So the next, 25, 30 years, I don't know how long it was actually Johannesburg-based.
Right.
I was in advertising for some time.
Yeah.
Then I was pulled into a direct selling organization called Golden Products, which a lot of people will know. It's now been through a couple of reinventions. It was GNLD. It's now called Neolife. I was pulled in there by a friend of mine who was running the Johannesburg headquarters. And he said, I need someone to set up advertising, PR kind of division in this company. It was a very big company with a lot of distributors, thousands of them. So that was quite a jump, because I wasn't sure about going out of advertising where things were going well into this. But I spent the next 17, 18 years with that company, eventually as the vice president of marketing.
Okay.
And that was a great time. I mean, I traveled a lot. It was an American-owned company. I went many, many times to California, the Bay Area, San Francisco, where they were headquartered. And I spent a lot of my life with that company, a lot of traveling. I enjoyed it. It was good. They eventually sent me to Australia So
The icing on the cake, Chris.
if you say so, Russ. I loved Australia. In fact, funnily enough, I had a cousin living in Brisbane because I was going to Brisbane.
Yeah.
So it happened so quickly. I'd actually left GNLD and gone on my own, although I was still consulting to them, when the MD phoned me and called me back and he said, look, we need you back and we need you in Australia and we'd like you there as soon as possible. And literally within a matter of weeks, as quickly as they could organize visas and what have you, I was in Brisbane running the company in Australia. And I actually had talking about voice and speaking and so on, I had a cousin living in Brisbane who I'd forgotten about. He married an Australian lass and was living there. So I looked him up and we got together. And at our first meeting, he said, I need to let you know that you're going to struggle in Australia. So I said, well, that's very nice. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Why? And he said, because you speak too posh. He said, the Aussies don't like people who speak like posh Englishmen. So, of course, that was, I suppose, the theatre training and background. But I didn't find that to be the case.
No, I wouldn't have thought that should be the case, Chris.
Yeah.
Okay, fascinating. So I want to pick up on a couple of strands here. So one was marriage. So married to Heidi, and you ended up with how many children?
4.
4?
A boy and 3 girls, as it happened.
Right.
And funny enough, I'm the son with 3 sisters. We created the identical family to the one I came from, interestingly.
And for how long were you married to Heidi?
Yeah, we were married, I can't remember now exactly, but it's over 30 years.
Right.
We were married a long time. However, that's a sort of a central part of my life story, I suppose, and not an easy one to talk about because of sexuality. I realized, once I got into my 50s, I realized something's not entirely right here. And I knew that a long time ago, when I was 11, 12, and of course when I got into Oliver, which was a very theatre environment, where there are a lot of gay people, a lot of different kind of people, and I was very young, I realized that, I think I realized I was bisexual, although I'm not sure I could have put that kind of term on it then. But I knew I was attracted to young girls. I mean, I was falling in love with young girls from the time I was about in standard 4. But as time went on, I realized I had an attraction for guys as well. That was quite worrying, but I sort of thought, well, maybe that goes away. In fact, I even read something about how that can be part of a young guy's life, and it sort of works its way out. So I just, kind of went along that road. As I say, met Heidi, fell really completely in love with Heidi, and pursued her and married her. But as the marriage went on, I realized that this part of me was still present. And in fact, as I got older, it was getting stronger. So much so that I got to a point in my life when I realized this was a problem. I had known about it quite early in my marriage, and in fact even discussed it with Heidi, who happens to be a social worker and is a remarkable person in that she has got great ability to care and understand. And she just said, well, can we make this work? And I said, well, let's try. And we sort of made it work for quite a long time. But by then, I'm jumping now ahead to my 50s.
Yes.
And I realized this thing was getting worse. Worse, if you can put it that way, not better. And so did she. And in fact, it was she at some point said, look, we've got a problem here that we're not going to be able to fix. And of course, then I went straight into denial.
Yes.
No, this is cool. I can sort this out, therapy, you name it, the whole story. But she was right. I couldn't fix it.
And it must have been very challenging because it's not that you don't love Heidi or...
Absolutely.
And that's often why a marriage will break up if there's a breakdown in that relationship. But it in this instance, it sounds like it wasn't about that.
No. We had a good marriage, and I love her to this day.
Yes.
I can say that quite easily. She's a remarkable human being, and we've stayed very good friends. Of course, we were married for 30 years or whatever it was.
Yes, enormous shared history and children and
Exactly,
all of
exactly. And the children hold us together. I mean, I adore my children, who also have been remarkably understanding, because at some point this had to come out.
that. Yes.
And we sat them down and said, look, guys, we're in trouble here. And I had to talk very openly about myself, which was hard. But very soon after that, I went into a very deep depression. And I went into just a space of mental darkness where I thought, what's going on here? I cannot break up this marriage. I cannot ruin the lives of these children. You know, you become...
Was this after you decided to separate or in the process?
It was in the process.
Right.
It was in the process. And in fact, even when I went to Australia, which was 2007, so I would have been 57 years old. So there were a few years of going through all this. When I went to Australia, I went on my own, and that was proper separation.
Right.
And in fact, in Australia, I was far more able to come to terms. I think because I was out of my normal, I was in a completely foreign country for me.
There's nobody knows Chris and his history and Heidi and kids and all that.
Exactly.
You're just the person they see in front of them, not with a history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely that. So I could look at that history and do some very serious soul searching and redefining, if you like, and trying to understand, well, what do I do with this? But I'd been through about 3 years of the most awful depression. I mean, I was hospitalized. I was put into the clinic here in Cape Town because I moved to Cape Town for a while, doing another job before I shot off to Australia. And I was in Crescent Clinic. I received shock treatment. I didn't know that that existed anymore. And it terrified me. But the psychiatrist said, you know, you are in a really bad way and we need to put extreme measures into place. I have no idea that that helped at all, to be quite honest. What I do know is that I lost quite a large chunks of my memory as a result of that. And I, you know, having Googled it and looked into it as one does, I know that that's something of a side effect of electroconvulsive therapy.
Sure.
It was awful. I mean, the actual experience of it, you know, is not sort of like one flew over the cuckoo's nest. I mean, they put you under an anesthetic and the procedure is done. It was just an absolutely awful period of my life, and a period in which it was just dark. I could not see any light. I clung onto God, crying out to him daily. Well, you know, many times a day, just trying to keep my head above water, because I thought, I'm going under here. I'm going under and I'm not coming up again.
So how did you come up again?
I was on medication, all that kind of thing, therapy, all the usual stuff, including the shock therapy. Then suddenly came this thing to go to Australia. And I think I actually see that as such a God intervention. I mean, my faith journey, if one can use that term, has been all over the show.
I wanted to come back to that, how that plays with, you know, this sexuality struggle, and we'll get there. But let's talk about how you came through.
So I just felt, I mean, I got this phone call from the managing director of the company I had been with, who I left for a short while, and he had in fact taken over the company internationally. He was based in the US, and he said, I want you back, come. So we talked, and he said, we need someone in Australia. The guy who was running the company there, for whatever reason, it wasn't quite working, and he said, I want to put you there. So I said, you're going to bring a South African into that situation? And he said, yeah, I think it's right. So it was, I felt like God lifted me out of all this mess that I was in and dropped me there in Brisbane. Not that suddenly it made very much difference, because I was still very depressed. And I was running a company. It was a fairly small branch of the company, but I had 27 people on the staff and a big warehouse and, you know, things to do.
But probably a lot of responsibility, but maybe not a lot of support, with, you know, not people who knew you.
Well, that's an interesting point. You know, you're quite right. There was very little support. And that, in the end, made it not work very well. Because there was so little support. Tremendous support from people who I got to know. I became friends with some very, very good people in Australia who were extremely supportive and didn't mind my English accent at all. So they were just really good.
It wouldn't be the first one they've ever heard, Chris.
Exactly. Seeing as they all come from there anyway.
Exactly.
But yeah, so that was a journey itself. I was there for 3 years. But that 3 years turned me around. And it was a number of things, but I was on my own. I was needing to deal with this. I was on my knees every day saying, Lord, just get me through today.
Yeah.
Just let me rise above this dark cloud. Enough. I was reading books about it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So 3 years in Australia, you then came back to South Africa.
Yeah.
To where? To Johannesburg? Or?
Well, interestingly, we had a beach house on the north coast of KZN.
Okay.
Back in the day, where it was, I call it a beach house, that immediately conjures up, these fabulous pictures. It was a little pondok, as they say in South Africa, a little shack of a house.
Yeah.
My grandfather bought a piece of land for £400 in the 50s, gave it to his 2 daughters, my mother and her sister, saying, you'll never be able to afford to take children on holidays, so go and build yourself a little place there, and you can. It was about in those days, a good hour and a half drive north out of Durban, up the north coast of KZN, what they call the Dolphin Coast.
Yeah.
Today, of course, it's a 40-minute run up the motorway. But my parents had retired there, my father had died, my mother had lived on, and when she was in her 80s, decided she couldn't really cope there on her own. I mean, she's 98 and still going strong.
Wow.
So she moved in with my sister in Durban and began to let the house. So when she knew I was coming back from Australia, she said, go and live at the cottage, which I did. And it's a very beautiful place with the most extraordinary views of the Indian Ocean. Reminds me of the Sunshine Coast, funnily enough. There were times when I would be up the Sunshine Coast north of Brisbane and think, am I in KZN? It was quite remarkable. So I lived there for 7 years. That's why I started my training. I thought, okay, I have to start again.
Yeah.
I had left the company.
Yes.
I have to start again. And that was when I decided I wanted to do training, teaching, stuff to do with acting and voice and performance.
Right. Okay.
So I started that there. I lived there for 7 years. That was 2010
Right.
up to 2017.
Right.
My children by then were all living in Cape Town.
Right.
I was back in South Africa. The healing process had come a long way. And I thought, and we needed to sell that house because my mother needed money for her old age and all the rest of it. So I moved to Cape Town, and I've been here now the last 5 years.
Okay. And can I ask what brought you here to RUC? How did you make that connection?
Yeah, I bumped into a very old friend of mine, in fact, on Facebook, and that's Ross Metcoff,
Oh, okay.
who a lot of the people in the church will know because he's been around a long time.
Fellow thespian.
Yes. Well, exactly. So I actually met Ross. Ross is a few years older than me, but I met Ross when he had just come out to South Africa from England at a Methodist church in Johannesburg after we had moved there. I mean, I was about 15, and Ross was about 20, and we were both involved in youth work in a very busy church. And we hit it off immediately. We became good friends. We, in fact, put quite a lot of productions on at that church, myself directing and Ross in them and so on. Then we sort of I moved back to Durban, as I said, on that program I was involved in, sort of lost touch. Ross got married and asked me to be his best man.
Wow.
So I was best man at his wedding, and then we sort of lost touch and kept touch, as one does, with old friendships. They moved to Botswana, then his marriage dissolved, and he moved back to England, and when he came back from England, he found me on Facebook. So I got in touch with Ross. We rekindled the friendship, which of course one can do almost immediately because all the old stuff just falls into place. And he invited me here. Yes. And I came along. I'm also a member of the Good Hope Metropolitan Community Church, which is a gay church, if you want to call it that. It's a church to include everybody,
Yes.
which happens to meet in this same building on a Sunday night.
Yes.
But not, at that time, it wasn't the case. I was playing the piano for them. So then I started coming here, and yeah, I just really enjoyed being very much enjoyed being in this church. I loved the music. I think Willem is an extraordinary organist. I love church organ, and this church has a very good one, and he plays it exceptionally well.
Yes.
So I loved the music. I really enjoyed Robert's preaching.
Yes.
Because as I said earlier, my faith journey has been all over the show via quite a lot of preachers who I never want to hear again, if I may say. You know, the ridiculous thing is that the man standing in the pulpit or the woman standing in the pulpit can have the biggest effect on your life, positively or negatively.
Yes.
It's a reality.
Yeah. Okay. So just tell us a little bit about that faith journey. You said it's been all over the show, and I guess how it intersected with your sexuality journey, you know, and was the faith thing part of what traumatized you, or, you know?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was born into a Methodist home. I think I mentioned my mother was secretary of the Methodist Church. I mean, when I was taking piano lessons after school, I would walk home, she would be at the church, I would go and play that organ. I just loved the sound of that organ. And I'm talking about when I was 7, 8 years old. So I grew up in the church. As I say, there have been so many ups and downs. I suppose everybody's faith journey has some ups and downs. It's like any journey. You know, there are good spots, there are bad spots. There are good roads, there are bad roads, etc. And that was the case for me. So there was a time when I felt very angry with the church, and I just kind of walked away from the church for a few years. Soon after I got married, actually, I thought, you know, I can't do this. We had moved to Johannesburg. I was in the advertising world. I was in my 30s. I was going places. And I just thought, you know, I can't do that. Funnily enough, we had then had 2 children. And it was Heidi who said, look, she also comes from a strong Christian background, Lutheran, as it so happens. She said, look, we're having children now. They need the chance to go to church, because I was just refusing to go. And they need the chance so that they can make up their own minds at some point about what faith means to them. So we started going back to church, and that rekindled for me. In fact, we started going to an Anglican church, because she was Lutheran, I was Methodist. Somehow Anglicanism seemed to fit in between that somehow. That's where we ended up. I got very involved in the music. It was St. Luke's Anglican Church in Johannesburg and Orchards. Peter Lee was the priest there, and Peter Lee is an absolutely brilliant preacher. And I was so caught up with, he made sense to me. You know, suddenly he was speaking to my heart and my mind, as it were.
Yes.
So that started my faith journey again. Then, of course, along came the sexuality. And I really struggled to reconcile that with faith, you know.
Being a Christian.
Yeah, being a Christian, and of course the fact that, you know, there are all these Bible readings that people trot out about how it's an abomination to the Lord and all this kind of thing. And I was just left there thinking, does the Lord even vaguely accept me? Does the Lord love me at all? Yeah. Because I'm everything he surely doesn't want. Certainly the church doesn't want. So there was a period there where, I mean, I managed to talk to people in the church. I remember talking to Jerry Bailey, who was an Anglican priest who moved into St. Luke's while I was going through that terrible period of depression and so on. And he was marvelous in just helping me. He was just so good at saying, look, you are the beloved. God loves you. This is the single most important thing for you to hold on to. And I did. And that helped a lot. Being in Australia helped, because again, I was on my own, and I sought out, you know, where I could try and get some help. In fact, I joined a group that comes under this what is it called? There's a big organization, which the ex-gay, which helps you come to terms with the thing and tries to make you normal again. I got involved in that in Brisbane. met every night, not every night, every week, one night a week, with a bunch of guys, one other Zimbabwean fellow actually, and then a bunch of locals, Australians, some of them people of the cloth who were struggling with this. And we'd meet and chat. I actually really enjoyed those evenings simply because we could talk very openly, and these guys spoke very openly. I was with a bunch of guys. There were between 12 and 20 of us in this room, all just looking like normal guys, struggling with this reality. Many of them married.
That sounds like the good part. The less good part to me sounds like it's not okay and we have to fix it, you know.
Exactly, exactly. And in fact, the turning point for me was this young Zimbabwean guy, white guy from Zimbabwe, who was really struggling with this thing and met a lady, and decided actually he wanted to get married. Yeah. And so this came up for discussion a lot of times. I, of course, kept onto him. I said, "How does she know about this, you know, because of my situation?" Yes. And oh yes, they had talked about it and she could cope with it. And I forget his name, let's call him Jack. I just said, "Jack, I think this is the biggest mistake you've ever made in your life. And you should not be doing this." Well, that caused an uproar in the group, particularly from the leader. Yes. And eventually I had to say to the group and to the leader, "Look, I can't do this."
You don't accept the underlying premise of the group.
Yes.
You can't really
exactly.
be in it.
I don't accept what you're trying to do here. Yeah. You know, you've been great and you've listened and the talking has been enabled, but the underlying thing here is wrong. Yeah. Sexuality is what it is. And what are we going to do? You know, we're all going to be put onto electrical impulse things and have aversion therapy, as one sees and hears in some of these movies. I said, I cannot do that. That was a breakthrough. Right. Because then I realized, okay, this is what I am. Yes. I have to accept this. God, I felt such a sense of God with me. Such a sense of God with me. And I felt that's the premise. That's what I'm going ahead with. Yeah. And then, you know, just the healing. So, I mean, that's 2008. 2009, just before I left Australia. Yeah. But being there had enabled. Now, you know, for other people maybe struggling with this, I wouldn't say, "We'll go to Australia," you know, or go somewhere. But sometimes that change of environment, that moving out of what I was stuck in, enabled me to see things differently. Yeah. No. It was a breakthrough time. Yes. And Chris, can I ask, I mean, it's one thing to feel you have attraction to males, other than just females. Has that then manifested itself? Have you been in a relationship with a man? I have not been in I've been in a couple of relationships. How serious are they? Well, I'm not sure, you know. I haven't sort of met someone who I thought, okay, this is the person I'd like to go into old age with. Yes. That's less important to me at the moment. Yeah. No, the only reason I ask is it's sort of to beat yourself up for many years over attraction that was never actually acted upon, you know, and now, you know, you work through that whole trauma of leaving the marriage with Heidi of 30 years, someone you loved, had children with, and you know, and then you're free. There's a whole, you know, it was a difficult journey, as you explained. Yeah. Now you're free to pursue other things, you know. Yeah. Has that actually happened, or do you want it to happen, or that's not really the point? It's happened a little bit. Yes. It's an interesting way you put it, because as you say that, I find myself thinking probably the more important thing for me was just the personal thing. Yes. Was the thing of saying, this is who I am. Yes. And I'm okay with that. My children, I think, are okay with that. Yes. I mean, this interview is a bit of a breakthrough for me, Russell, in that I have never done this before, where I said, look, this is the deal. You're being very brave. So, you know, there could be a lot of people out there, or people who look at this and think, wow, is that the case? And that, of course, worries me, you know, because there's just this stigma that goes with all this. But to try to get back to your question quickly, it's less about relationship than it is about just feeling okay about myself
Yeah.
and saying the situation is all right.
Yeah.
There have been relationships, and I mean, I'm in one now, which is a fairly loose arrangement, if one can put it that way.
Yes.
That sort of seems to be okay.
Cool. Well, I'm delighted you have found a place here where you can hopefully reconcile who you are with your faith and your desire to still be a Christian and embrace that side of life.
Yeah, if I could make a comment about that, I think that there is an openness in this church, which you don't have in many churches. I experienced that with Robert. You know, Robert's style as a minister, preacher, whatever it might be called in this particular church, is very open. I find every time I sit and listen to Robert, I'm thinking about something again. He just opens my mind. That openness, I think, is critically important. And I think it's something the church doesn't really have. By nature, by definition, the church is kind of a lot more closed and like, this is the box we all fit into. Well, what about the people who don't fit in that box? So as a church, I certainly have found this to be a much more open church than any others I've been in before.
Well, I think, speaking as a member of council, we certainly would say that that's part of what we hope defines us, is this sense of inclusiveness.
Very much so.
And that people are accepted as they are. And so, you know.
I've met so many really nice people who very quickly have become friends.
Yes.
And I'm really enjoying that.
Yeah, great. And so, Chris, tell us just a little bit more about what does fun look like for you? You know, when you're not working and coaching, what sort of makes you smile and brings you to life?
Well, in fact, funny enough, the coaching does, actually. The work I'm doing now, it feels like maybe I should have been doing this work a long time ago. Yes. I enjoy teaching. I enjoy sharing ideas and trying to get people to see things differently. I love the fact that a person can come to me and say, look, I need help with this and this, and I can help them.
Yes.
And that at the end of a few sessions, they can go away feeling better about whatever it is they have to do. So that I enjoy. Fun otherwise is a lot of time spent with family. My oldest daughter is an opera singer, so I really enjoy playing piano and her singing. Obviously, I love music. It's a great love of mine. I enjoy the theatre. I'd be very happy to go to the theatre. I love watching stuff on Netflix or whatever. I'm captivated by entertainment of almost any kind. I love walking. So if I can get out on a beach or anywhere and walk, I really enjoy that. But a lot of my time is actually spent on my own. I write. And in fact, I'm working on a couple of projects at the moment, one of which is called Voice Power. It's just to do with how to use your voice successfully, how to get the most out of this instrument we've all got. So quite a lot of my time is writing, which I don't find easy. I enjoy it, but you know, you've got to force yourself to do it.
It's a discipline.
Yes, discipline.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. We've really enjoyed getting to know you better. Thank you for being so open, and it's great to have you as part of this community, and all the best.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you for helping me to be open. I really enjoyed this chat. Thank you.